There's two questions I want to ask related to television. What was the first thing you remember watching? And when was the first time you were on TV? The first show I remember watching was Barney, and the first time I was on TV was in kindergarten. I was on the local news on a Christmas float. Whether we had dreams of being on TV or loved sitting down to watch our favorite shows over the weekend, television has played a large part in our world. Nicole Kidman is one of the most influential actresses in the last 30 years. She has a filmography that is hard to beat, a personal life that's been highly followed, and there's something that's captivating about her. Today, I want to talk about one of my favorite Nicole Kidman films, 1995's To Die For, and how it's a great commentary on television and fame. A little background on the film. The film was based on Joyce Maynard's book, To Die For, published in 1992. The book is loosely based on the trial of Pamela Smart, who went to prison for seducing a 15-year-old and getting him to kill her husband. This was the first trial in the United States to have TV cameras in the courtroom. Fun fact, Joyce Maynard is the mother of Wilson Bethel, known to many as Wade Kinsella from Heart of Dixie. The film was directed by Gus Van Sant. Nicole Kidman wasn't the clear favorite for the role as the studio, Columbia Pictures, wanted Meg Ryan, who had been in films like When Harry Met Sally and Sleepless in Seattle. However, the role was too much of a contrast for Ryan's image at the time. Nicole Kidman had to lobby hard for the role. Once Nicole got the role, she took the preparation seriously. In an EW article by Benjamin Svetkey, he writes how Nicole handled the role. "I don't like the feeling that when the cameras start rolling, you're suddenly performing," she says. "So I spoke in my American accent from the minute we started rehearsal to the minute we finished the movie. You didn't have to call me by my character's name or anything. It's just that I walked and talked differently. I perceived things more intensely. To maintain that intensity, Kidman banned her husband from the set. It's too hard," she says. "You're creating a character, so you can't have this person who knows you inside out watching. Also, he's a very forceful presence on a set, and it's distracting to people." The Kidman method apparently works. Her performance in To Die For is the sharpest and funniest of her career. No small vindication, considering that at first, the film's producers didn't think she could handle the comedy. Nicole saw Suzanne Stone as a complex character, which is what made her fascinating to watch. She used her complexity to make her case for the role. In Nicole Kidman, A Kind of Life, Dickerson writes, how Van Sant listened patiently as she explained that Suzanne was not some totally screwed up bitch, but rather a woman with incredible savvy who made some bad decisions. He told her over the telephone that she had the part. He liked the fact that she was not an overexposed female lead, and he liked the passion that she put into her argument, that she was perfect for the part. At the time, Nicole's personal life was all over the news. Her marriage to Tom Cruise, her children, Scientology. Nicole was trying to separate herself from Tom and be known in her own right. The book details the work Nicole put into the role. She spent months researching American women and studied what was on television. She commented how she would get involved in talk shows and yell back at the screen. The book has each chapter focus on a specific character, and the film allows each character to shine with them having individual interviews in the faux documentary. Both detail the events leading to Larry Moretto's murder. The film premiered at Cannes Film Festival in May 1995, and when the film released later that year, the critics praised her performance. Mick LaSalle from the San Francisco Chronicle writes, Suzanne is a monster, and a lesser actress might have played her on one note. But Kidman brings to the role layers of meaning, intention, and impulse, telling her story in close-up, as she does throughout the film. Kidman lets you see the calculation, the wheels turning, the transparent efforts to charm that succeed in charming all the same. Even though he praised Kidman's performance, he critiqued the plot of the film, as he later writes, the murder plot is a cheap turn that says absolutely nothing about the unique nature of Suzanne's ambition. She could be any kind of sociopath and plot to kill somebody. When To Die For loses Suzanne's media obsession as its point of focus, it ceases to be a pointed satire and becomes just another fairly good black comedy about a deluded person. For the rest of the movie, there is still Kidman's chilling, delightful performance to contemplate. To Die For could have been a great film. It's not, but it shows what Nicole Kidman can do. That's probably how it will be remembered. While I disagree with the critiques of the plot, it does bring up the satirical aspect of the film around fame and television. The murder doesn't feel like a cheap turn to me, because Suzanne is driven by what will make her famous. She wants to leave her small town and make it in the industry. Larry's murder has people take an interest in her, which she sees as beneficial for her career. Rolling Stone's Peter Travers writes in his review, "It sounds awful, like a tawdry rehash of the Pamela Smart case that spawned a tabloid frenzy and several TV movies. But To Die For, sparked by volcanically sexy and richly comic performance by Kidman that deserves to make her an Oscar favorite, is prime social satire and outrageous fun." Nicole Kidman won the Golden Globe and Critics' Choice for her performance, while being nominated for a BAFTA. She didn't get an Oscar nomination for this role. To Die For is about a woman, Suzanne Stone, who does the weather for her local news. Her husband, Larry, ends up dead, and the film cuts to interviews from different people detailing what happened. The film opens with newspapers writing about the murder, talking about how the weather girl is a possible suspect. The murder was in a small town. Everyone was paying attention to what was happening. The film begins with showing how Larry and Suzanne met and fell in love. There's a scene where Suzanne and Larry have their families over. Larry compares her to Julia Child, who's an American chef. This is probably early evidence of Larry being okay with Suzanne being a stay-at-home mom someday, highlighting that she's a great cook. We come to find out that Suzanne actually had someone else cook the food for their families. Janice breaks the news about going on tour with the Ice Follies, which is a popular ice show. However, Larry interrupts by telling everyone that Suzanne is going to work at a news station. Suzanne begins working at the local news station, and she convinces them to let her do the weather. She calls herself an on-air correspondent and begins working on a documentary around high school students. The 3 students that are interviewed are Jimmy, Russell, and Lydia. She starts having a romantic relationship with Jimmy. When she has a disagreement with Larry, she begins plotting his murder. She manipulates Jimmy, saying how her husband has a temper, letting him believe he hurts her. She can't divorce him because then he'll get everything, and says how someone that does something like that to you doesn't deserve to live. Jimmy ends up getting Lydia's gun. Larry and Suzanne are celebrating their 1-year anniversary, and that's the day he's murdered. There's this shot with her blowing out the candle that has red lighting. Red lighting in film can symbolize intense emotions. It's hinting at what's to come with Larry meeting a violent end. Russell and Jimmy break into their house, and Jimmy kills Larry. Suzanne is at work and comes home to everyone there, telling her what happened. She pretends to care and immediately cuts off the teenagers. She was supposed to pay Russell, but she didn't. Lydia and Jimmy are sad to no longer hang out with her. Lydia comes to Suzanne's door and wants to talk, saying how Jimmy is waiting for her. Suzanne had sold Jimmy on being together, but Suzanne is cold throughout this interaction. The police catch on that Suzanne is responsible and are trying to hold her accountable. Lydia is wired and she meets up with Suzanne to get a confession. The police try to hold Suzanne accountable in court, but it doesn't hold up. Entrapment, so she's free. She speaks to the cameras and says how her husband has a serious cocaine problem. Jimmy and Russell got him addicted to drugs and they were the main supplier. The boys killed Larry when he wanted to break free and turn them in. The interview at the courthouse was the last time Suzanne was seen by her parents. Suzanne falls for a man who works for a studio and is interested in her documentary. He kills her when they meet because Larry's dad hired him. I find it fascinating how we don't see Suzanne die on camera. She gets murdered off screen. Larry's dad gets notified she's dead and she ends up underneath the ice. Suzanne isn't in a place where she'd be immortalized or somewhere she could be looked at. She's frozen, literally, where she'll likely never be found. Janice is shown at the end of the film skating over her. Let's talk about television and how it's seen in the film. Television in the 90s had a wide variety. NBC had hit shows like Seinfeld, Frasier, and Friends that were branded as must-see TV. Murdoch expanded Fox, and that's not even getting into HBO and what's to come with hit shows like The Sopranos and Sex and the City. The Telecommunications Act of 1996 had telephone companies and broadcast networks own cable networks, like Comcast and AT&T Broadband. Don't think I've forgotten about UPN, that was making waves for teen television, as if I've never talked about any of their shows here before. All these changes to the media landscape made it so there were so many things to watch, and people were seeing how attainable it was to be on TV. While Suzanne is trying to be a journalist, she wants to be recognizable and influential, like the TV stars of the time. Suzanne says, "You're not anybody in America unless you're on TV. On TV is where we learn about who we really are. Because what's the point of doing anything worthwhile if nobody's watching? And if people are watching, it makes you a better person." This represents the idea around television in the film, with Suzanne doing whatever it takes to get on camera. Suzanne wants to be famous and makes references to other journalists like Barbara Walters, saying how she has this deep sympathy for people's feelings and a wide range of current events. I wouldn't say Barbara Walters was sympathetic. She asked invasive questions, like the questions about Dolly Parton's appearance. Suzanne wears a veil at her wedding that was apparently the exact same one Maria Shriver wore at her wedding. Suzanne wants to be like the journalists that came before her and models her life off them. The documentary wasn't about Suzanne, but she was using it to advance her career. When working on the documentary, Suzanne is distancing herself from Larry. One example is Suzanne's at a family gathering. She's watching, and Larry's playing with the kids. Suzanne doesn't seem comfortable in any environment that isn't advancing her TV career. The first time she broadcasts the weather, her mom takes a photo. The final time she's on camera is after Larry is murdered and leaving the courthouse. She makes up a ludicrous story of how he died that no one with a brain will believe. She's attempting to craft a narrative to explain away any concern of her involvement, while it just makes it apparent that she did something. Suzanne mentions how the TV journalist serves as a messenger that brings the world into our homes and homes into the world. She wants to be this messenger. She gets her wish. Larry's dad is watching the moment in front of the courthouse and breaks the TV after what Suzanne says. The other element of the film I think about is the true crime aspect. At the time, courtrooms were beginning to be televised and the public was able to gather information and develop opinions. In 2026, social media has made it significantly easier to follow with podcasts, YouTube videos, and TikTok. It's becoming more invasive, as it isn't hard to contact the family members or feel like a detective when solving a crime from 20 years ago. In the current frenzy of true crime, if this took place in the present day, Suzanne would have been seen as being misunderstood. She didn't deserve to die, and there would have been countless theories on what happened. Suzanne, the newscaster, the career woman. Suzanne doesn't go by her married name, she goes by her maiden name, Suzanne Stone. This wasn't uncommon with journalists and newscasters. It's a way to keep their public and personal lives separate and build their own identity. Suzanne is shown to be pretty ambitious with achieving her dreams, starting with the convention when Larry is out with friends. It's hinted that Suzanne goes to a convention and sleeps with one of the keynote speakers. When Suzanne is working at the news station, the guys there nickname her Gangbusters, which is a comment on how Suzanne was pretty determined to get on air and was rather aggressive about it. The job listing was just her answering mail, running errands, minimum pay, no benefits. According to Nicole Kidman, A Kind of Life, James L. Dickerson says, "There are a lot of things in the movie that show you Suzanne is a victim, of television certainly. She grew up in a generation that just watched television and had her morals dictated by TV's moral code. Then, within that, she's a woman who has to pursue whatever she has to get where she wants to get. In that sense, I see her as very much a victim." Obviously, audiences will make judgments on it differently, but I had to approach it from that way. I wouldn't say Suzanne is a victim. I think it's understandable for her to be driven and want to make a name for herself. However, she had a privileged upbringing. It doesn't seem like she had any real fear of consequences because when did they ever apply to her? Her idea of resolving the issues with Larry wasn't to talk to him, but kill him. Even when divorce was suggested, she rejected it. This is made apparent in the scene after the boys are arrested and she tells Lydia, "Who will they believe? Me or you guys?" She knows she's this white, middle-class, upper-middle-class blonde woman. How could she commit such a crime? The perception of Suzanne from others is an important aspect of everything, as she cares about how she comes off. Janice, Larry's sister, described Suzanne as cold and didn't understand why her brother liked her. Janice was the only person who saw through Suzanne. Larry describes Suzanne to Janice as fragile and delicate. Janice comments that when kissing a doll, they don't kiss back. Larry wanted someone that he could take care of. Suzanne wanted someone that would prioritize her and let her do what she wanted. Larry and Suzanne's relationship had Suzanne walk all over him. He wanted them to be partners, Suzanne be a mother and have kids. However, Suzanne was career-driven, which isn't a bad thing. However, Suzanne married someone that really wanted to have them. Janice tells Larry to stand up to Suzanne about what he wants by finally saying no, and that ends up being his downfall. Larry tries to make a life with Suzanne as Larry's managing the restaurant. He has some new exciting ideas regarding the menu, live music on weekends, and he wants her to shoot the acts and sell the tapes back to the performers. Larry underestimated how much Suzanne wanted to be on camera, wanting to achieve her dream of getting big network offers and living in New York or LA. She would never accept being in the background without it benefiting her in some kind of way. There's this really cool shot of Larry and Suzanne's conversation, which has the camera narrow on Larry. At the end of this conversation, she says, "I'll think about it," and that was the moment she began plotting to kill Larry. Through that, I saw it as Larry was the star in that situation. She liked her relationship with Larry because he still allowed her to be the focal point. But once that dynamic in her mind had shifted, then she had to respond. That also relates to her saying how no one will replace her father because her dad always saw her as his little girl. Her dad was proud of her and saw her as the center of his world. With this being a faux documentary, Suzanne's background is white, like she's on TV, while Janice is interviewed at the rink and Lydia at her house. Suzanne cared about how she was coming off and wanted to have some control on her image. When Suzanne's parents are being interviewed at the Laura show, her dad makes it obvious that Suzanne was above Larry, with her being a junior college graduate compared to him only graduating high school. There's this implication of the Moretto's ties to the mafia, which cuts to Suzanne's screams. Foreshadowing aside, their relationship was questioned by both sides of the family. Larry's dad mentioned how he thought Larry was going to marry a nice Italian girl. Larry's values align with Italian culture, as his family is important and they care about one another. One thing I found interesting that differs from the film is Suzanne having a sister. She's in the background throughout the film, but she demonstrates an interesting dynamic of her sister feeling second to Suzanne. In the book, Faye, the younger sister, knew her parents liked her sister more. Suzanne's costuming is such an important part of the film, with her meeting Larry as an aspiring journalist. Throughout the film, it seems like she mostly wears blues, yellows, and pinks. She's in touch with her femininity, and she wears patterns throughout the film, like when she wears the checkered yellow suit at the news station. She doesn't really dress casually after getting her job, outside of rare occasions. For example, when Larry's away, she's wearing a green cropped sweater, and it feels like she's playing a character. She's in touch with her femininity, and she loves patterns, as seen in the checkered yellow suit she wears at the news station. I see this casual outfit as her wanting to fit in with the high school kids. Her plan was to begin seducing Jimmy and lay the groundwork for Larry's murder. Her first outfit in front of the camera was a light blue suit. The final outfit she wears while reporting the weather wasn't as bright as her usual ensembles. The outfit feels like a preview of a funeral, like she's already mourning him on air. In her final interviews for the documentary that has the white background, she's wearing a pink suit, which feels like her last hurrah. After Larry's death, Suzanne's trying to get her documentary to studios. She says how new markets are clamoring for her attention and she's trying to manage the fame that she has. Through the tapes, it reveals the relationship between Jimmy and Suzanne, calling her clean and looking at the camera during one of the interviews. When he's arrested, Jimmy has photos with Suzanne in his jacket. The students getting caught was because they didn't do a good job hiding the murder, but also Suzanne was dumb and thinking that she'd be able to hide her involvement. Suzanne wasn't this great planner and did this all rather recklessly. It's obvious that Suzanne is constantly thinking about the narrative. When being photographed, she's smiling. She loves the attention and thinks she's won. The attention from the crime is enough to progress her career and pursue her dreams. If I had to describe Suzanne in one word, I would say driven. She is determined to accomplish her goals and doesn't care who she hurts to get there. High schoolers as the subject. There's 3 high school students that were a part of the documentary: Lydia, Russell, and Jimmy. Lydia speaks rather positively about Suzanne, saying she was a beautiful human being and talks about wearing a dress Suzanne bought her. She looks up to her. When Suzanne goes to the high school to recruit, the first question she asks is if anyone has been on TV. Lydia is the only one that has, and details how she walked by a store and they took her photo. Students laugh, but Suzanne accepts it, saying how people get their starts sometimes accidentally. The other students don't seem all that interested in the documentary, and the class disparities are obvious. It's interesting to note that the students that were less affluent participated, possibly wanting an escape from their daily lives or out of boredom. They saw the documentary as a way to change their circumstances, the same way Suzanne did. Russell participated because he was threatened by his teacher, because of the influence Larry's family had on the community. Russell makes it clear he wants money out of Suzanne. He did end up getting a Rolex and a chain from Larry when him and Jimmy kill him. Suzanne's documentary is supposedly about depicting how teenagers live, their education, peer pressure, feelings about drugs, rap music, etc. The idea of the documentary sounds so bland, especially with 3 students that are all friends with one another. There's very little diversity of opinions. Another note that becomes obvious in the film is Suzanne doesn't relate to other adults, the closest person probably being Larry. It makes me wonder what her life in high school was like and how she was kind of using this documentary to live that out. Larry goes to a trade show and Suzanne invites Jimmy and Lydia to her house. They begin dancing to music. Lydia goes to walk the dog, Walter, and comes back and discovers Suzanne and Jimmy hooking up. Suzanne is pretty conscious of her image and her weight, which rubs off on Lydia. Lydia mentions how Suzanne told her how she was going to be her personal assistant in LA. Lydia was excited and said how she was living in a really great movie, but rated X, because of all the sex. She reveals to Suzanne that her mom's boyfriend, Chester, assaulted her, which leads to her also revealing that she has a gun. Lydia says how Suzanne was her only friend, which points to how lonely she was. She didn't even really consider Russell or Jimmy her friends. No one her age that she feels like understands her. Lydia meets Suzanne while wired by the police, and Suzanne says how the jury will believe Suzanne over Lydia, Russell, and Jimmy. They live in trailers. She comes from a good home. There was also Suzanne talking about how Lydia has lesbian tendencies. Suzanne never saw Lydia as a friend. So, at the end of the film, Russell ends up getting a plea deal, so he only serves 16 years. Jimmy's in prison for life, and Lydia has the life Suzanne wanted. Lydia recites back what Suzanne says at the beginning of the film about wanting to be on television, and is set to go on different TV shows. It's kind of sad how signing up for this silly documentary derailed all of their lives, even if it's ironic that Lydia got everything that Suzanne could ever want. I find To Die For fascinating to look back on 30 years later, as the messages still feel culturally relevant. We are on camera more than we know. People still want the attention that being on TV brings, and will do anything for it. With social media, the claim to fame is easier. However, the 15 minutes of fame can feel a lot shorter with the rapidly changing news cycle. In addition, the internet is quote-unquote forever. Suzanne represents how people will do whatever it takes to reach their goals and be successful. The lack of morals and integrity is normal. We see this constantly now, with people recording others without consent, the rise of mommy vloggers, and more. Suzanne Stone wants to be remembered, and that she was. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in my next video.